The main ones that I like to celebrate is what most people would call May Day, Beltane. It's just a fun, frolicking uh, uh, tradition. We like to take out the maypole and dance around the maypole. We get ribbons and we intertwine them as we're dancing, and we have a lot of fun with that. Uh, all of the rituals that we do are family friendly. There are rituals for Beltane, which is May Day, that are not family friendly. There are versions of what people call the Great Rite, which is the joining of the god and the goddess. So what they do is they pick candidates out of their coven or their temple to represent the god and the goddess, and they come together. The way that I practice the Great Rite is I take an athame, which is a ritual dagger, a double-sided ritual dagger with a black handle, and I take a chalice, which is like a goblet, and I fill the chalice with holy water to represent the creativity of the goddess. The chalice represents the womb of the goddess, and the athame is phallic. It's male. So you join the two. A fertile woman holds the chalice, and a fertile man holds the athame, and you say, as with the god, so with the goddess, we unite them. And of course you dunk it a few times. And usually you have phallic bread, which is bread shaped like a penis. My other favorite holiday is what I call Samhain, and that's the end of the witch's year. It's Halloween, what most people call Halloween. It's my favorite. That's the time of the year. That's the time of the year that everyone comes together and they remember everyone that they lost. They remember everyone and everything that had died in that year, whether it's your dog or your mother or your sister or whoever, whatever you lost. You also think about your ancestors. You celebrate them. I like to have what is called dumb supper, which is a supper where everyone is silent and you invite in the ancestral spirits before you have your dinner. And so the spirits of the old can come and join you. And then you feast. And then at the end, you take a plate and you fill it with all of the goodies that you've prepared for Samhain, and you set it out to the side. And that is to the ancestors and to the gods. You do not eat that. That plate is consumed by the gods. It's consumed by nature. And it's consumed by the ancestors. So it's a type of sacrifice. I also like to build a bardic circle for Samhain, and that's what we do. We build a huge fire, and we dance around the circle, and we tell stories from our past and about our ancestors, and sometimes we tell legends of old.
What is your favorite story to tell?
My favorite story? That's a hard one too. My favorite story of all is probably Renee Rondolia Ash, which is not my ancestral story, but when I was a tour guide in Savannah, it was about Savannah's gentle giant, or as I call it, gentle giant. Renee was born and he was a 15-pound baby, and his mother died and during childbirth, and his father had to raise him. Well, Renee acted odd. People didn't like Renee because he acted odd. He kept to himself, and he would like to run in the alleyways of what was then Savannah. This was back a little after colonial times. And so he would go through the slave quarters, And there was this little slave girl that he connected to, and he would always play with her. And the little girl would get in trouble by her mother for playing with Rene. Well, by this time, Rene was 6'7". You know, he was only 13 years old at this time, and he was 6'7". So people saw him as this monster. For one, he would not relate to anyone, and if anyone touched him, he would have a fit. So, as the story goes along, the slave girl dies of a broken neck, and everyone blames Rene. So, they really don't care about their slave girl. I mean, think about it in that time period, except for probably money-wise. But they use it as an excuse, and they storm Rene's house, and his father is trying to understand why they're storming his house, and they drag Rene outside, and they beat him, and they wrap a noose around his neck, and the father talks them down and says, I'll keep control of him, I'll keep control of him. So they let Rene go, and they lock him. They build and lock him in this shanty cell right next to his father's house. And they put bars on the windows, and they put bars on the doors so that he can never be let out. And they lock up the door, and only the sheriff has the key. What would be the sheriff at that time has the key to his cell. And as the story goes along, there's a fire. This is during one of the three great fires of Savannah. And during all of the chaos, the fire is on the other side of the city. During all of the chaos, Rene's cell gets unlocked, and Rene gets out. Of course he does. He's been locked up for quite a few months. And he goes and he plays. And he liked to play in the graveyard, a Colonial Park cemetery. So he went there and he played. And near the end of the night, the fire was put out. Rene's father had helped with the fire, so no one was there to know that he was out. Rene returns, and of course, they see him return. And he goes back in. He goes into the house, and the door is shut, and they lock him back in there. Later on, they find the body of a child in the graveyard, and the child's neck is broken. Once again, they blame Rene, and they storm his house again. They unlock his cell, and they beat him, and they drag him down the cobblestone road to a large oak tree. And they throw the rope over the limb, over a really big, thick limb, and they wrap the noose around his throat. And they pull, and they pull, and they pull until he's off the ground. And they make it to where he can stand on the tips of his toes, and he's fine, but if he goes down to his heels, he starts to choke. And they would beat him and whip him, and they kept him like this, and they tied off the rope. And finally, Rene gave up, and he slumped down, and they would beat him to try to get him to stand back up, because they wanted him to suffer even more. And this was done by a huge crowd. And Rene passes out because he can't breathe, and they leave him there, and he dies. And then they leave his body there for a few days. They won't allow him to be buried in the cemetery, and they discard his body in the Savannah River. His father during all of this was knocked out. He tried to save him, and by the time his father came to, Rene was dead. Come to find out later, a few years later, children are killed again. And it was the sheriff who was killing all of the children.